Hello, welcome to the class. Dr. O here. Today we are going to learn about firms in the competitive market. In the producer theory, each firm try to maximizing their profit. In that purpose, we analyze profit maximizing firms' behavior. But if we want to analyze profit maximizing firms' behavior, we need to assume that the market structure first. So the firm's behavior is different between the competitive market and monopoly. Market structure itself is defined by several aspects, but generally and simply we are assuming that number of firms in the market is one of the criteria to determine the market structure. So only one firm exists in the market we define as monopoly. Mono means one in English. So monopoly is only one firm exists in the market. So the firm itself, that only one firm ruling the market to changing all the equilibrium point. But we are not going to talk about monopoly today. We assume that we are on the competitive market we already learned. So we need to note that or recall the characteristic of perfectly competitive market. Under the perfectly competitive market assumption, there is a lot of buyer and seller. In other words, we know that there is infinitely many consumer exist in the market and producer too. So producer firms is the same words in the analysis perspective. And in that competitive market, because of the lots of buyer and seller are coexist in the market, so there is no power each individual firms or each individual consumer. So each individual consumer try to mingle or change the equilibrium point. It is not simply possible because those power that each one of the consumer or firm's power is minimal. That's nothing. So they cannot interfere any change or interfere equilibrium point to make any change. So under the perfectly competitive market, so many buyers, so many sellers, and homogeneous products, which means that all the products, the quality is exactly the same. We assume that banana is banana, car is car, apple is apple. So same apple. There is a whole variety of rice exists, apple exists, you imagine, but we assume they're homogeneous. There are no such a distinction and difference from producer A to B. In that perspective, the quality or characteristic of a product is exactly same in the perfectly competitive market, and so many buyer and seller exist. So no power exists in the market from the buyer or seller. So in this chapter, we are looking at the producer theory perspective. So we are focusing more on the producer side. It's a firm's perspective. So as a firm, I don't have any power to change any equilibrium point. As I mentioned before, short run is different from the long run because of the availability of input factor. So all of the input factors are available in the long run, and in the short run, there is such a limitation of sum of input factors. So we assume that labor is available in the short run. In the long run, capital is available as well. So we start with the two input factor models. So in the long run, we can use labor and capital freely, but in the short run, we cannot use capital as an input factor. So we can change the labor amount, but we cannot change the capital. So it's a simple analysis or simple assumption of short run and long run distinction. In this case, in the structure of market and derived supply curve, in the long run and short run is a little bit different. So profit maximizing firm perspective, in the long run, they can decide also all input factor can be changed, which means that scale can be changed for each one of the firms. In other words, where our aspect can be changed like this. In the short run, we cannot get out of the market. It is called exit. In the long run, exit and entry is available. As the situation of a profit maximizing, we can enter the market or exit the market freely in the long run, but in the short run, we cannot do that. So in other words, we can change some of input factors. That means that capital is already, paid, or the cost of capital amount is already fixed. We assume that farmer's case, land fee or rental of certain area or the field, you need to pay certain amount. Even though you don't change quantity out of it, that amount should be fixed and sunk already. But in the long run, we can change amount of land we can borrow or rent out, or we can freely change the labor amount. So in other words, we can make additional plant or additional farm. We can expand as a scale perspective. We can make 0.5 of it or 2 times of our, field size or farm size and triple, quadruple, 100 times. It is available in each one of the firm perspective. In other words, any other outsider looking at this market, if there is sufficient profit exist, they want to enter this market. We need to a little bit about the profit situation sooner or later, but this is happening in the long run. So long run perspective, firm can choose entry or exit freely. But in the short run, we cannot do that. We can only change it labor as the previous model we analyze. So it is a little bit different in the long run and short run in that perspective. As note that we will apply this kind of vision or tools to each one of the model and looking at the graph and try to understand each situation later. So today we assume that under the perfectly competitive market, firm try to maximizing their own profit. How we can drive demand curve out of it. That's the point of this lecture. So before profit maximizing or profit is defined, profit is already defined that total revenue minus total cost. But we want to maximize it. So each firm try to maximize their own profit. To get that profit maximizing point or scale or the level. So profit function is function of Q. Revenue is function of Q. Cost is function of Q. We learned about cost function last week. So all those functions are depending on the amount of Q, how many output produced in the firm, that determine the cost amount. That also determine the revenue amount. But that revenue side, we need to learn about or think about a little bit more further to define it. Because that revenue is coming out from the market structure. And today we are limited to think about the competitive market. Under this scenario, we are going to looking at the marginal revenue, which is coming out from the total revenue. Total revenue is a function of Q, so Q changes. 1 unit of Q increases, how much revenue increases, that's nothing but marginal revenue. As we learned about average revenue inside of it, we can calculate it too. But the most important concept is marginal revenue and compare with marginal cost. To get the optimum point, additional cost out of it and getting benefit out of it, we compare each other, changing 1 unit of Q at the same at one time. And if we can get the more revenue relative to the cost, in this case, what? Marginal revenue is bigger than marginal cost. We increase quantity, we produce more. And if marginal cost is bigger than marginal revenue, we cut back the quantity we want to produce. That's the key point of it. So marginal revenue, marginal cost compared together, we can find out exact profit maximizing Q level. So today's lecture will follow this kind of logic. So marginal revenue equal to marginal cost will giving us to profit maximizing quantity. Now let's get it started. So find out profit maximizing quantity we want to get. First, we need to define the revenue function, which is total revenue function. Well, let's think about this. What is the total revenue function? So total revenue function, in the simply, well, we produce certain amount of quantity Q, then how much money we can get? We can think like this. If we produce certain amount of Q, let's say 100 Q is equal to 100, then going out to the market, we want to sell it. Then perfectly competitive market, equilibrium price is right there already. And each individual firm perspective, we cannot change the price at all. If we increase 100 to the 200, 300, 400, price level doesn't change at all. Why? There is a lot of consumer already there, and there is a lot of producer already there in the market. So they making a deal between them and get the equilibrium point. Even though I increase 100 units or 100 quantity more, that doesn't change at all about the equilibrium point. Unlimitedly many individual buyer and seller is in the market. So small amount relative to the unlimited or infinitely many buyer and seller, adding a little bit more, 100 more, 1,000 more, doesn't change the equilibrium point. So we need to understand that concept, price. Market equilibrium price is right there. We cannot change at all. We produce more or less, price level doesn't change. Even though I didn't produce at all other producer will produce and then supply all the available or needed quantity, necessary quantity out there. So equilibrium point doesn't change. In that perspective, P is given. Equilibrium price is already, we observed in the market, it is happening already. So P is given. So we produce 100, 200, 300, and go to the market and try to sell it. How much we can charge? P, equilibrium price P. So how much money we can make? P times Q. So let's say price is $5 per unit or per, each one of the unit. Then I produce 100 unit, then 5 times 100, which is 500, will be the money I can make at the market if I produce 100. 200 times 5. So in other words, total revenue function is nothing but P times Q. Make sense? It's not that difficult. In that perspective, average revenue is total revenue P times Q divided by Q, right? So in that perspective, average revenue is nothing but just P. Easy. Now, marginal revenue. Marginal revenue function is if I increase one more unit, then how much money additionally I can make. So P times Q differentiate with Q with respect to Q, then that's P2. Oh, in other words, verbally I can explain that. P doesn't change at all. $5 is right there. Even though I increase a lot or less and produce less, P is still there, fixed. $5, for example, is there. So I additionally produce one more unit, then additionally I can make $5, which means that's P. So you can take a derivative of P times Q with respect to Q, then that's P2. So in the perfectly competitive market, P is equal to marginal revenue equal to average revenue. That's only hold perfectly competitive market. You need to note that. Now let's think about each firm try to maximize its profit. profit maximizing firm can change their Q, quantity. They will play with quantity. How many quantity I need to produce to maximize my profit. That's the purpose of each one of the individual firm. Profit maximizing is the purpose of firm, right? So Q is target variable, objective variable. So I freely change the Q to maximize profit. So under the sense that there is total revenue minus total cost is defined as a profit. How much money I can make in the market, P times Q. And then with the production, certain level of production Q, how much cost do we need to pay? So total revenue minus total cost is nothing but profit, and we want to maximizing that profit. In that perspective, we want to looking at this as marginal perspective, as one unit changes, how much our situation changes. Let's think about that. One more output, I want to produce more, then how much money I can make is defined as a marginal revenue. Q, unit Q. A unit Q changes, how much revenue changes. That's nothing but marginal revenue. In the opposite side, we can think of it, increasing one more unit of Q, how much cost is increasing is nothing but marginal cost. So in that case is how each one of the firm behave. So I just play with Q. I increase one more unit of Q. Marginal revenue, which is making the money because of that, the action is bigger than I need to pay, then my total total perspective, profit, total revenue minus total cost perspective, the profit will be increased by the action of producing one more unit. So we compare marginal revenue and marginal cost continuously. We can find out exact quantity to maximizing our profit. So that's the point. We think at the marginal in the comparing with unit changes. So one more unit, one more unit, one more unit, more and more, and one less, one less, one less, comparing with the marginal revenue and marginal cost. So in that perspective, optimum level of profit, which is maximizing profit, is determined at the point that marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. That Q will give you the maximizing profit point. Profit maximizing point. So as you're looking at this graph, each one of the level, there is 3 levels, QA, QB, and Q1. So let's think about QA cases. And QA case, as you can see, you vertically going up, then you can see each one of the marginal revenue and marginal cost. At the graph, marginal revenue is bigger than marginal cost. So each one of unit you increases correspondingly. So QA to increasing red arrow point, your movement, one more unit, even at that point in that area, QA to the Q1, that MR is bigger than MC. QA point, for example, MR red line is above relative to the QMC. But the gap between them is reducing until when Q1. Q1 is the exact point that MR is equal to MC. For example, QB. Then QB cases, if you produce QB, MC is bigger than MR. You will not produce at that point because marginal cost is bigger than marginal revenue. So your movement should be negative, like reducing quantity. So by doing so, what we can observe that the gap is decreasing, which means that it is closing to the marginal profit maximizing point, which is a Q1. At the point Q1, MR is equal to MC. Marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. At that point, profit maximizing point can be determined. So in a certain point, we are learning this principle as how market equilibrium is determined too. So at that time, I was introduced that supply and demand model is nothing but marginal cost and marginal revenue or cost benefit analysis. There is analogy with it. So this gap, and think about the optimization, profit maximization, which point gave you the profit maximizing Q? Because we are looking at or playing with Q. Target variable, objective variable is Q. Using the Q, we try to reach to the optimum point. So in this graph, we are looking at it, compared with the marginal revenue and marginal cost. Marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost gives us the profit maximum point, profit maximizing point. So in the previous lecture, I briefly introduced that marginal cost is nothing but individual firm's supply curve. It is directly coming from the competitive market case. Well, marginal cost will give us each one of the point which is intersect with the marginal revenue point. What is that? That is a profit maximizing point. Profit maximizing quantity, it is showing the point. So as you looking at the graph, MR and MR2 is drawn here. There is a purpose to draw like that, but let's think about correspondingly. At the beginning, marginal revenue and marginal cost is intersect at the Q1 and P1. Well, the P1 is given right here. Vertical axis is cost, all different kind of cost, but marginal cost, in other words, dollar value. So either way, it's fine. You just writing down dollar there or, currency value. It is directly reflecting the value of currency or value. So it's fine. But MR is equal to P under competitive market. Average revenue, marginal revenue is equal to P. So P1 is given as a market equilibrium point. Marginal revenue is horizontal line at the level of P1. That's what it shows. At the P1 level, Q1 is nothing but profit maximizing quantity we derived. Then under this case, let's put it away with this concept. Profit maximizing point is P is equal to MC. Marginal revenue is equal to P. Except that what we learned before is like this. What is the functional form of supply curve? Supply itself is determined by the price. Market price changes. Each one of the firm will change their behavior. How? Their own purpose is profit maximization. Let's think about that. And then the market equilibrium price is changed. Then what should I do? For example, here, let's say market equilibrium price is changed from P1 to P2. Prices increases. Yeah, increasing quantity. So that is given like this. Market equilibrium price is increasing. That means that my marginal revenue is increased. My marginal revenue increasing. Yeah, P1, P2. P is equal to my marginal revenue. So P increases means that my marginal revenue increases. Then what do you need to do? Increase our production quantity. So it is shown in the graph. Q1 as green arrow point. P1, P2. Market equilibrium price increases from P1 and P2. What I should do? I need to increase Q1 to Q2. I increase my production. So profit maximizing point is changing like that. So it is a jump to the P1 to P2, but we can think of continuous motion or continuous change. There is a lot of P1 and there is a lot of point or level of price level, right, in between P1 and P2. So increasing P gradually inside of the P1 to P2, then what will happen? My profit maximizing quantity, continuously increasing correspondingly. But the thing is, all the points are on top of marginal cost curve. Because marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, corresponding price changes, I will change correspondingly one-to-one relations to MC curve. MC curve is fixed, and now price level only changes. And individual perspective, market equilibrium point, I cannot handle. I just accept it, but market price keep changing. We realize that, then what is our profit maximizing behavior changes? Correspondingly, following the MC curve, we will increase our production. That's the point. So individual firms' supply curve willing to charge in their perspective, opposite point of view, but price changes correspondingly, I will increase quantity out of it. So marginal revenue intersect each one of the MC point on top of MC curve. So price is continuously increases, then following the MC curve, I will increase quantity out of it. The graph showing you exactly like that. So in that perspective, MC curve is nothing but supply curve. Now let's think about short run and long run behavior of each one of the firm. So in the short run, as a firm, we cannot change or we cannot get out of the market. Why? There is a fixed cost. We cannot change one or some of input factor. So that amount we already paid. That fixed amount is already paid. So we made a contract. We can just bond with. We cannot just live with it. So we cannot exit the market. Only we can do is shut down. So the concept of short run and long run behavior of each one of firm in competitive market is exit or entry in the long run, in the short run, shut down or producing some certain amount of quantity. So that's the distinction of short run and long run behavior. So shut down is one thing and exit is another thing. So it's in the short run, if the situation is really bad, we shut down. Even though we pay the fixed cost amount already, we don't produce at all. That is a shutdown. And exit means in the long run, we can change it. Yeah, now I don't want to borrow field to running or managing the farm. Then exit the market. I'm going to do something else. That's exit from the one market we are working on right now. So in the short run, we shut down. In the long run, we exit the market. So that distinction is coming out from the fixed cost. In other words, input factor is fixed, right? We cannot change freely. Previous example, capital is fixed, and labor is we can change as our will. So that long run, short run distinction is necessary to think about it. First, we need to think about short run perspective of each one of the firm. So cost is involving and producing process, and fixed cost is key for the short run because short run, some of input factor we cannot change. So we just pay it as a fixed amount. So cost of shutdown, right? When we think about shutdown, what do we come up with? Q is equal to 0. So total revenue in the perspective is equal to 0. Quantity is 0, right? But what can you get from the 0 production? So once we shut down in the short run, we don't need to pay variable cost anymore. So only you need to pay fixed cost. So by shutting down, what it can earn is we don't need to worry about the variable cost, but we don't have any revenue at all because Q is equal to 0. So in that perspective, what do you need to do? What do you think? We give up total revenue. Total revenue is going to 0 by shutdown, right? And we can get, what it can get is variable cost. So we don't need to worry about the variable cost. So what is the judgment or criteria to shut down? Well, simply we can say total revenue is less than variable cost. Then we need to shut down. So the condition of shutdown, total revenue is less than variable cost. So we can change this condition. Total revenue is less than variable cost. Divide by Q, both side. Then total revenue divided by Q is less than variable cost divided by Q. In other words, total revenue divided by Q is average revenue. Average revenue is less than average variable cost. In other words, average revenue and marginal revenue is equal to P in competitive market. So P is less than average variable cost, then we need to shut down. So that's ultimate form of shutdown condition. What is that? Shutdown condition is total revenue is less than variable cost. In other words, P is less than average variable cost. That's it. So by looking at the graph, you can find very valuable point for shutdown. So looking at this graph, marginal cost curve and average total cost and average variable cost is drawn at the graph. So that red line is nothing but marginal cost curve, and that's nothing but Shonen supply curve for each individual firm. So let's think a little bit more in detail. The shape of ATC, quadratic function looking curve, and AVC is similar like that. But it is not actually quadratic exactly, but that looks like it. And one characteristic of average total cost and average variable cost, the minimum point average variable cost and average total cost always cut by marginal cost. In other words, marginal cost curve is go through the minimum point of average total cost and average variable cost. There is a mathematical proof we can do, but at this point, postpone it a little bit later. But let's see. So the graph does look like it, like a minimum point of ATC and the minimum point on AVC is, on top of marginal cost curve. In other words, marginal cost is cut through the minimum point of average variable cost and average total cost. So that's minimum point, and the horizontal lines on top of it, P, let's say it. So as long as P changes, we can derive supply curve as a corresponding profit maximizing Q as individual perspective, individual firm's perspective. So every individual firm, if the price is a certain level, in other words, shutdown point. So that shutdown point is a vertical red line in this graph. And above that price level, MC curve, following the MC curve, we are going to produce that quantity amount. As P increases, we will increase our production output. So that's red line directly show us that each individual firm's profit maximizing behavior, in other words, individual supply curve. So that lines are minimum point of AVC, tangent, and the minimum point is going through by marginal cost curve, and that is looking like that. So before that shutdown point, we don't produce at all. So as long as passing that P point, price lines, price level, then we start to produce, because that shutdown condition P is less than AVC. So that P line, horizontal line, less than that, we don't produce at all. That means that shutdown. And price level is higher than that, we start to produce. So we produce correspondingly MC point, which is a profit maximizing quantity, corresponding price level. So the red line is, again, individual firms Shonen supply curve. So shutdown point can be determined in the Shonen perspective, under the assumption that some of input factor we cannot choose. Now let's consider about long run perspective of each individual firm. In the long run, whatever we just decided to produce zero quantity, then what we are going to lose? Obviously, revenue, total revenue is missing. 0 times P is equal to 0. Total revenue is equal to 0, right? And what will be getting in not producing at all? So total cost. We are no more considering about cost at all. Q is equal to 0, then total cost is equal to 0. In the previous case, there is a fixed cost. A fixed cost we cannot handle with it. Shutdown doesn't change at all about the fixed cost. But in the long run, there is no such a thing as a fixed cost. So total cost is equal to 0 when we are going to produce 0 output. So in the long run perspective, what we are going to looking at? Well, in the long run, entry and exit happens. What does that mean? Total revenue and total cost is benefit and cost, or we will get the total revenue amount to produce, and even if we are not producing at all, we're losing total amount is as not producing decision, and we don't need to worry about total cost. So total revenue is bigger than total cost, which means that profit is a positive, then entry happens. Profit is equal to 0, profit 0 point, and profit is negative, which is total revenue is less than total cost. What will happen? We don't run a business anymore. So exit happening. So entry and exit is by looking at profit level. Profit is positive. What we are looking at outside, wow, that profit, that industry, profit is positive. Then everybody want to enter this industry. If the profit is equal less than 0, then inside the producer try to leave out of exit from the industry. So from this market. So in the long run perspective, entry and exit is determined by the profit level. In other words, by not producing at all, we cannot earn any money. Total revenue is equal to 0, and on top of that, total cost is equal to 0 too. Because we don't produce, cost is equal to 0. So we compare with the total revenue and total cost at the same time. Total revenue is bigger than total cost, then entry happened. Total revenue is less than total cost, exit is happening. So long-run perspective or long-run decision in the firm is determined by looking at the profit level. Profit is bigger than 0, which means that total revenue is bigger than total cost. By definition, pi is equal to total revenue minus total cost. So by looking at the long run average total cost is drawn. As I slightly mentioned about envelope theorem, it is look like a connection of each one of individual level of average total cost. By the scale changes, we can make a long run average total cost. But it is smoothly connected. Very simple changes of scales is allowed, then we finally can find long run average total cost. That looks like blue curve right there. And marginal cost is right there too. And each one of them is crossed by the marginal cost at the minimum point. But in the long run, average total cost is composed, and that minimum point also crossed by marginal cost curve. So we're looking at it, individual long run supply curve is a little bit different from it, because before that we're looking at the minimum point as average variable cost, and now long run average total cost and the horizontal line, tangent line, and then we decide exit and entry is happening. So the curve we are looking at it is long run individual supply curve looks like that. Price level, which is marginal revenue, is greater than certain level. Following the MC curve, we can get individual long run supply curve can be drawn. But when you're looking at entry and exit, as I told you in the long run perspective, entry and exit is happening. In the short run, shut down because of fixed cost. But we are looking at the long run right now. And in the long run, entry and exit is happening with the condition that total revenue is greater than total cost, and exit is happening, total revenue is less than total cost. What does that mean? Profit is equal to profit is greater than zero, entry happen. Profit is less than zero, then doesn't make money, right? Neither cost is bigger than that. Yeah, that's very obvious to exit to the market. But how come profit zero condition? Why the firm produce at the profit is equal to zero? Even though profit is equal to zero, they are running the business. Why is that? Let's think about it. The answer is this profit zero is assume that under the economics, we know that the cost is opportunity cost. So this profit zero means that we are making profit and accounting profit. In other words, yeah, it is exactly same amount of profit you are running this business or other alternative, best alternative out there to run a business, exactly same amount of profit you are going to get. So it is called economic profit, economic zero profit. So even though profit is equal to zero, we're gonna running a business because it's the same, indifferent from running business A or business B, industry staying in the industry A or industry B. So best alternative you can do except this business giving us exactly same amount of profit we can get. So that analogy is right there. That idea is, behind the scene of it. So zero profit doesn't mean that you don't make money at all, but you are considerable amount of money you can make as a profit, but it's exactly the same doing this or other alternative out of this. Now look at this graph. This is the long-run market supply curve. So profit zero condition is happening, the minimum point of long-run average total cost, price level, P mean. P is equal to minimum point of ATC, that point, tangent point right there, and MC curve is going through there. So as long as a P is right there, firm will produce infinitely many amount. That's market, long-run market supply curve. As long as P is right there and all the firms or representative firm, we are saying, individual firms structure is like that, cost structure is like that, they will produce a certain amount and there is infinitely many producers exist in the market. So at that point of P, yeah, there is so many output will be provided in the market. So long-run supply curve is horizontal line as P. So as long as a demand curve, we can see the equilibrium quantity out there. So that's not exactly showing like that, but visually we can imagine that that amount is nothing but the supply amount of total market supply. So infinitely many the product will be available in the market. Other than that, price is higher than that. Everybody try to enter to the market. In order to understand that graph, let's see the next one. So this is a scenario is happening. One firm perspective is the same graph. MC curve and average total cost curve. And we can see that P1 is going through the minimum ATC point. And let's say P2 is happening. So suddenly P2. Why the prices increases? Well, let's say market, what the market or what the situation of market changes. Let's see. Originally, right hand side, D1 and S1 is cross-sect and the equilibrium point A is happening. P1, Q1, Q1, P1 combination point A is equilibrium point. For some reason, demand is increases. Demand curve shift to the right. D1 is moved to the D2. Now red D2 curve and new equilibrium point is B. What happened? Price increases. Can you see? Yeah, prices increases to the P2 level. Then P2 level, what happens? So minimum point of ATC, price level is right there, then profit zero conditions. But P2 is higher than P1, then profit increases, a positive profit. How much profit we can get? Well, that orange color, right? Orange yellowish color, that rectangle area is nothing but profit. How we can get it? The Q, the amount you need to produce, profit maximizing quantity is MC cross-sect with the P2. So that amount will be produced. And the difference, right? Average revenue minus average cost, then that difference of vertical differences multiplied by together, profit can be calculated. That yellowish orange area is nothing but profit. Profit is positive. What will happen? Entry until when profit is equal to zero. That's what we can see at this point. So more firm enter the market until when price is exactly same as minimum point of ATC, which is zero profit. Firm will enter this industry until the profit is equal to zero. In other words, economic profit is equal to zero. Accountingly, we can get the positive profit, but opportunity cost inclusive, then zero profit is happening right here. So entry is happening means that we assume that this firm is representative. All the similar type of cost structure each one of individual firm has. Then that firm is enters, then supply curve shift to the right. Why? The MC curve and horizontally aggregate is nothing but market supply curve. So S1 shift to the right to S2. Then finally we can get the C point as equilibrium point. It's not going to go further because C point we can get zero profit. In the long run dynamic is like that. For some reason demand changes, price increases, then firm has positive profit and all the competitive outside will enter to this industry until profit is going to equal to zero again. So at the long run supply curve is a horizontal line because if profit is greater than zero, other firms will enter this market. So very stabilized long run supply horizontal line is reflect this fact. If there is a positive profit, other firms will enter. Today we learn about competitive market producers' behavior. Each one of the producer or firm try to maximize its profit. To determine the profit, we need to define the revenue first, and we can get the total revenue, and correspondingly we will get the margin revenue. And each one of the point to decide optimum point, which is profit maximizing point, we compare marginal revenue to marginal cost. And in the Shonen, there is a fixed cost, so condition is a little bit different from Shonen and long run. The distinction is fixed cost exists or not, or some of input factor cannot be changed or not, or available. Change is possible or not is determined that, right? If it is not possible, that's Shonen. If it is all the input factor can be changed, then that's long run. So in the Shonen, the condition is we can decide shutting down the business, or in the long run, entry and exit is happening freely. So the shutdown point can be determined by P is greater than average variable cost. And in the long run, we see that price is greater than average total cost. So compare with those things. price and average variable cost in the shonen, price and average total cost in the long run. So shonen and long run shutdown and entry is determined by two important cost functions. Finally, I hope you understand the final graph I mentioned. I showed you shonen and long run effect of increase in demand. So demand increases, price increases, then profit is greater than zero, then other firm will enter to the market. In the shonen, entry is not happening, so profit is positive is possible in the shonen at a certain time period in the shonen, but entry is happening in the long run. Profit should be equal to zero in equilibrium point. So the dynamics, price increases by the demand changes, profit is increases greater than zero, and entry happens, and entry of firms make supply curve to shift to the right, and eventually profit should be equal to zero. That's really important concept for understanding dynamics of long run situation. I hope you understand well this lecture, and I hope you guys good luck to prepare your exam, and see you on this week. Have a good one.